When I stepped through the heavy oak doors of the mansion rented for the company's annual reception, the first thing that hit me was the smell: old wood, expensive wine, and some kind of floral candle trying way too hard to mask the age of the place. The second thing that hit me was her. Liv. My wife, Liv, standing across the room near the grand staircase, practically pressed against her boss, Miles Barkley. At first, I thought maybe I was just seeing it wrong. Maybe the way the shadows played on the walls made them look closer than they were. But the longer I stood there, frozen in the entryway like some idiot who had forgotten how to move, the clearer it became. They were too close. Closer than two coworkers had any business being. His hand casually brushed her lower back, a gesture that, once upon a time, belonged to me, and she didn't even flinch. Miles leaned in, whispered something in her ear, and Liv laughed. Not her usual laugh, not the quiet, crinkly-eyed laugh she reserved for stupid jokes I told or for those moments when she couldn't hide how happy she was. No, this laugh was loud, high-pitched, a little too eager, and a little too forced. The kind of laugh you use when you want someone to know you're paying attention. And then, as if it couldn't get any worse, her hand lifted, soft and slow, and rested lightly on his chest. Just for a second. But it was enough. Enough to snap something deep inside me, like the first small crack that forms in a frozen pond before the whole thing shatters. I felt the champagne glass slipping slightly in my hand, my palm suddenly slick with sweat. My throat tightened so fast it hurt to swallow. A part of me wanted to march right over, wedge myself between them, maybe crack some stupid joke about how I didn't know this year's entertainment included a floor show. Another part of me, the bigger part, stayed rooted to the spot, like if I just stood still enough, maybe the world would tilt back into place. She saw me then. Her eyes flicked up over Miles's shoulder, scanning the crowd, and locked onto mine. And for a single, brutal heartbeat, I saw it, a flicker across her face. Fear? Guilt? Regret? I don't know. It was gone almost before it appeared, replaced by a practiced smile, the kind she used when meeting distant relatives or clients she didn't particularly like. She gave me a little wave, like I was some casual acquaintance she had just bumped into at the grocery store, not the man she had promised forever to. Then she stepped back from Miles, said something quick that made him chuckle, and disappeared into the milling crowd as if nothing had happened at all. As if I hadn't seen it. As if I hadn't existed. I just stood there, stuck, while servers floated past carrying trays of delicate appetizers and tall flutes of champagne. Around me, the air buzzed with polite conversation, laughter, the clink of glass on glass. It all felt muffled, like I was underwater, like the whole world was happening in a place I wasn't invited to anymore. Someone brushed past me. I think it was one of Liv's coworkers, a woman I'd met once or twice, but whose name I couldn't remember. She smiled politely, muttered an apology, and kept moving. Just another face blurring past, unaware or pretending to be. Probably pretending. Because that's the thing, isn't it? Pretending is easier. Cleaner. You don't have to ask hard questions if you just pretend you didn't see anything. I wandered toward the side of the room, feeling like I was moving through quicksand. I found a quiet spot near one of the towering windows and leaned against the wall, my champagne glass still in my hand, now more of a prop than a drink. Through the window, I could see the dark lawn stretched out under the stars, the wrought iron fence at the property's edge, the city lights blinking far off in the distance like a life I used to know but couldn't quite reach anymore. I told myself it was nothing. I tried to cling to that. Maybe it was just a bad angle. Maybe she laughed because she was nervous. Maybe the hand on his chest was just reflex. People do stupid, meaningless things when they're drunk, right? Maybe Miles said something funny and Liv, who had always been overly polite in social situations, laughed too hard because that's just what she did. But deep down, somewhere beneath the excuses I wanted so badly to believe, I knew. I knew. The way she looked at him. The way she touched him. The way she looked at me, or rather, the way she didn't. The worst part wasn't the suspicion. It wasn't the fear curling cold and tight in my gut. It was the realization that I was the only one who seemed surprised by it. Like everyone else in the room already knew and had moved on without telling me. Like I was the last one to catch on to the joke, the sad, pathetic punchline. A server came by offering another glass of champagne. I took it, even though I hadn't touched the first one. The glass was cool and smooth in my hand, the bubbles rising steadily to the surface, bursting and disappearing one after another. Just like that, gone in an instant. I turned my gaze back toward the crowd, scanning for Liv. She was across the room now, talking animatedly with a group from the marketing department, holding her glass close to her lips but not drinking from it. She threw her head back and laughed again, that same too loud laugh, and when one of the women touched her arm in solidarity, Liv flinched. Barely. But I saw it. She wasn't really there. Not with them. Not with me. Maybe she hadn't been for a while. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in that awful realization, but eventually my legs started to ache and my hand went numb around the stem of the glass. I drained it in one swallow, not tasting it, not caring, and set the empty flute on the nearest table. Around me, the party kept going, laughter, music, endless conversation, and I felt more and more like a ghost haunting my own life. The night was just beginning, but for me, something had already ended. Something I wasn't sure I could ever get back. That night, after we got home, I couldn't sleep. I lay there on my side of the bed, staring up at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city outside and the soft, even breathing of Liv beside me. She had fallen asleep almost instantly, or at least pretended to. Maybe that was easier for her. Pretend, slip away, bury it deep enough so it didn't scratch at her the way it was clawing at me. I closed my eyes and tried to push the image out of my mind, her body angled too close to Miles, her fingers grazing his chest like it was something she had done 100 times before. But the harder I tried not to think about it, the clearer it became. Like it had been burned onto the inside of my eyelids. At some point, maybe around 2 or 3 in the morning, I got out of bed. I padded to the kitchen in the dark, not bothering to turn on any lights, letting the cold tile sting the soles of my feet. I poured myself a glass of water, hands trembling slightly, and leaned against the counter, staring at nothing. It wasn't just tonight. It hadn't started tonight. It was the dozens of small moments, the flashes of something I had tried so hard to ignore. The missed calls. The sudden late nights at work that hadn't used to be a thing. The way she would fumble to put her phone face down whenever I walked into the room, flashing me a smile that felt too bright, too careful. The way she started dressing differently. At first, I hadn't thought much of it, everyone needs a change now and then, right? But it wasn't just new clothes. It was how deliberate it became. Lipstick she never used to wear unless we were going out somewhere special. Heels she used to call impractical. Makeup touched up in the car mirror when she thought I wasn't paying attention. And the calendar. She had always been the more organized one between us, filling out dates, appointments, reminders. Lately, the calendar had become strangely empty. Or carefully curated, like whole chunks of her life no longer needed to be documented. Like parts of herself were being hidden away, piece by piece, just out of my reach. The realization sat in my gut like a stone. How long had I been pretending not to notice? I set the glass down harder than necessary, the sharp clink echoing through the kitchen. Barkley, our old golden retriever, who had been snoozing under the table, stirred, thumping his tail once against the floor before settling again. Even he knew something was off. Dogs can sense these things better than we can, I think. Better than I could, anyway. I moved to the living room and sank into the couch, pulling a blanket around me like armor against the sudden, brutal chill creeping under my skin. My mind raced, dragging up every little thing I had brushed aside over the past few months, every warning sign I had convinced myself didn't matter. Like when she started declining my offers to pick her up after work. She used to love that, used to call it her favorite part of the day, seeing my car pull up, hopping in with a tired smile and stories about her meetings. But now she always had an excuse. Last-minute projects. Impromptu team drinks. Traffic too bad to make it worth the drive. It wasn't until tonight, seeing her with Miles, that it all clicked into place, all the tiny lies, the offhand dismissals, the way she was always a little too eager to be somewhere I wasn't. Like I was the one being left behind in my own marriage, and I hadn't even noticed I was already standing outside the door. I pulled out my phone, half on instinct, thumb hovering over her name in my recent calls list. What was I even doing? What did I think would happen if I called her now, from the other room? That she'd tell me everything? That she'd somehow undo the past 6 months with a few whispered words in the dark? Pathetic. I tossed the phone onto the coffee table with a hollow thud and rubbed my face with my hands, exhaustion pulling at every muscle in my body. But I knew sleep wasn't coming. Not tonight. Instead, I sat there and let the doubts unravel in my mind, one by one, until the sky outside started to pale with the first hints of dawn. I thought about how we met, all that stupid, sweet, naive certainty that we were different, that we were untouchable. I thought about the promises we made, standing in front of friends and family, believing every word like gospel. I thought about all the mornings we woke up tangled together, lazy and laughing, back when it felt like there was no safer place in the world than in each other's arms. And I thought about how easily, how quietly, it all started slipping away, so slowly I hadn't even realized we were drowning. By the time the sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in sickly shades of orange and pink, I knew something had shifted inside me. Something irreversible. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the idea that Liv might be falling for someone else, or the fact that somewhere deep down. I wasn't even surprised. I didn't wake her when I finally crept back to our room. I just stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her sleep. She looked peaceful, her face relaxed, her body curled up in the way she always used to after a long day. She looked like my wife. But I knew, and it gutted me to admit it, she wasn't mine anymore. At least not in the way that mattered. I barely made it through the next day. I went through the motions, answering emails at work, nodding at meetings, pretending everything was fine while my mind replayed last night over and over like a broken film reel. I kept seeing her laughing with Miles, kept feeling that sick lurch in my stomach every time I thought about how natural it all looked. How easy. Like they weren't even worried about being caught. By the time the reception rolled around again that evening, the second half of the company's weekend-long event, I was running on fumes. I told myself I wasn't going to go. I told myself I didn't care anymore, that it wasn't worth it. But some stubborn, masochistic part of me needed to see it with my own eyes. Needed confirmation, I guess, even if a smarter man would have stayed home and spared himself the pain. When I walked into the lobby of the hotel where they were hosting the second night, everything felt sharper somehow, the lights too bright, the noise too loud, the fake smile stretched just a little too tight across familiar faces. I scanned the crowd automatically, even though I told myself I wouldn't. And there she was. Liv stood by the far wall near a small, dimly lit alcove, tucked partially out of sight. Miles was with her, of course, standing too close again, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. They were angled toward each other in that same familiar way, like there was nobody else in the world but the two of them. I stayed frozen for a minute, half hidden behind a decorative column, my heart hammering so loudly in my ears it drowned out the rest of the world. I could leave. I could turn around and walk out and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Pretend that none of this was happening. But I didn't. I watched. I watched as Miles leaned in, murmuring something that made Liv's lips curve into a small, secretive smile, not the kind she used with friends or coworkers. Not the kind she ever used with me anymore. I watched as he slipped his hand around her waist, pulling her just slightly closer. And I watched as she let him. No flinch. No hesitation. Just a quick glance over her shoulder, scanning the room, like she was making sure no one important was watching. She didn't see me at first. But when she did, when her gaze caught mine from across the lobby, everything inside me cracked open. For a half second, she froze. I saw her lips part, just a fraction, her whole body stiffen. I saw the panic flash across her face. And then, just as quickly, she masked it with that same brittle smile she had used the night before. She stepped away from him, smoothing down her dress like she could erase what had just happened with a few careful movements. She laughed at something Miles said, a little too loudly, a little too brightly, and turned back toward the crowd like she hadn't just betrayed everything we had built. I felt like I was moving underwater as I turned and stumbled back toward the lobby doors. I needed air. I needed space. I needed to get away before I did something reckless, something I couldn't take back. But as I pushed open the doors and stepped into the cold night air, I heard footsteps behind me. "Hey, wait." Liv's voice. Breathless. Urgent. I kept walking, ignoring her, but she caught up quickly, grabbing my arm with fingers that were colder than the night wind. "Please, don't leave. Let's just go back inside, okay? Don't make a scene." Her voice was low and tight, her eyes darting around to make sure no one was paying attention. Like the worst thing in the world wouldn't be that she broke my heart, but that someone else might notice. I shook her off, my hands trembling with the effort it took not to say everything boiling in my chest. "Why don't you ask Miles to take you back inside?" I said, my voice sharp enough to make her flinch. "It's not like that," she hissed, stepping in front of me, trying to block my path. "It's just work. You're reading too much into it." I laughed. I couldn't help it, a dry, broken sound that hurt coming out. "Work? Is that what you call letting your boss grope you in a hotel lobby?" "Mark," she reached for me again, but I stepped back, putting just enough distance between us that it felt like a canyon. "Don't," I said, more tired than angry now. "Just don't." For a second, she looked like she might say something else, some desperate attempt to patch the cracks spreading faster than she could cover them. But in the end, she just stood there, biting her lips so hard I thought she might draw blood, her eyes wide and glassy. I didn't wait to see what excuse she'd come up with next. I turned and walked away, shoving my hands deep into my pockets, my whole body buzzing with the kind of raw, hollow adrenaline that leaves you feeling more empty than alive. I didn't go home right away. I didn't know where to go, honestly. I just drove, mindlessly looping around the city while the night blurred past my windows. Every red light, every neon sign, every empty sidewalk felt like it belonged to someone else's life, not mine. Mine was back there, unraveling by the minute. I kept thinking about all the times I had defended her, made excuses for her, even when the little voice in the back of my mind, the one I kept silencing, told me something was wrong. I thought about the stupid, casual way she had smiled at Miles. The way she laughed when she was supposed to be in love with me. I thought about how love wasn't supposed to feel like this, like a trap slowly tightening around your chest until you couldn't breathe anymore. And most of all, I thought about how, in a single evening, Liv had managed to take everything good we had ever built together and turn it into something I could never unsee. I pulled into an empty parking lot eventually, some grimy 24-hour diner on the edge of town, and just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached. I had my undeniable proof. And it wasn't some dramatic scene. It wasn't some screaming, slamming doors betrayal. It was worse. It was the small, careful, practiced ease of it. The way she had made room in her life for someone else, piece by piece, while letting me believe there was still room for me. I don't remember how long I sat there in the parking lot, staring at the cracked asphalt under the glow of a flickering streetlight. It could have been minutes. Could have been hours. Time stopped meaning anything after a while. At some point, I realized I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed or punched the steering wheel or done any of the things I always thought someone would do when they caught the person they loved slipping away. Maybe I was still in shock. Maybe part of me had been expecting this all along, and tonight had just ripped away the last flimsy curtain I'd been hiding behind. I finally dragged myself out of the car and into the diner. It smelled like burnt coffee and stale French fries, and there was a woman behind the counter who didn't even look up when the bell above the door chimed. A few other people sat slumped in booths, nursing cold cups of coffee and late-night regrets. It felt fitting, somehow. I slid into a booth in the corner and stared out the window, the night pressing in on all sides. A waitress came by and poured me a coffee without asking, leaving a cracked ceramic mug in front of me like she knew exactly why I was there and didn't need the story. I didn't touch it. I just sat there, my hands wrapped around the warm mug like it might anchor me to something real. My mind kept drifting back over everything, not just tonight, but all the little ways Liv had been leaving me long before Miles ever put his hands on her. The nights she came home late and smelled like someone else's cologne. The business trips that always had some reason why spouses weren't invited. The times I'd reach for her in bed and she'd flinch just slightly before settling into my arms with a sigh that didn't sound content anymore. At the time, I told myself it was just the stress. Everyone goes through rough patches. Jobs get demanding. Life gets complicated. People drift a little and then they find their way back to each other. That's what marriage is, isn't it? A constant choosing, day after day, to stay. But Liv hadn't been choosing me. Not for a long time. I thought about the way she had laughed with Miles. The way her body leaned into his like it belonged there. How natural it had all looked, not rushed or awkward or guilty. Practiced. Comfortable. It wasn't a drunken mistake or a spur-of-the-moment lapse in judgment. It was something that had been growing between them quietly, in the spaces where I wasn't looking, until it was big enough to swallow the whole damn relationship. The thing that gutted me most wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was realizing that she hadn't just hurt me, she had erased me. Piece by piece, she had edited me out of her life. Out of her smiles. Out of her future. And I had let her. I pressed my palms hard against my eyes, feeling the burn of unshed tears, but still, they didn't fall. It was like the grief was too big for crying, a deep, hollow ache that settled into my bones and refused to move. When the waitress came by again, I forced myself to mumble a thank you. She gave me a soft, pitying look before refilling my coffee and wandering away. I wondered how many nights she had seen people like me, wrecked, gutted, hollowed-out versions of themselves, sitting in cracked vinyl booths and trying to figure out where it all went wrong. The truth was, I knew exactly where it went wrong. It went wrong when I started assuming love was enough. It went wrong when I stopped noticing the quiet spaces growing between us, assuming they'd close up on their own. It went wrong when I loved her so much I didn't even see when she stopped loving me back. Around 3 a.m, I finally pulled myself together enough to leave a few bills on the table and stumble back out into the cold night. The sky was starting to lighten slightly, that strange purgatory between night and dawn where everything looks blurry and unreal. I drove without thinking, winding my way through the empty streets until I found myself pulling into our driveway. No, not our driveway. Mine now. The house looked the same as always, the porch light Liv always insisted we leave on, the flower bed she had meticulously cared for, the little crack in the walkway I always meant to fix. But it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a crime scene. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, watching the house like I was afraid it might change while I looked away. Part of me expected her to be waiting at the window, wringing her hands, looking for me in the shadows. But the windows stayed dark. No sign of her. She hadn't even bothered to call. I finally led the engine and made my way inside. The air smelled like her, soft perfume and laundry detergent, and it hit me like a punch to the chest. I stumbled into the kitchen and leaned heavily against the counter, trying to remember how to breathe. This was it. The moment where everything that had been simmering under the surface finally boiled over. The moment I stopped pretending. I didn't pack a bag right away. I didn't smash anything or throw her things into the street. I just stood there, numb and broken, in the middle of a life I didn't recognize anymore. Eventually, I made my way to the bedroom. She wasn't there. The bed was made, untouched, like a museum exhibit dedicated to a love story that had ended long before the visitors realized it. I peeled off my jacket and let it fall to the floor. Sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the worn grooves in the hardwood floor, remembering how we used to dance there in our socks on lazy Sunday mornings. Remembering how we used to belong to each other. I didn't sleep. I didn't even close my eyes. I just sat there and let the reality of it sink in, cold, heavy, final. There was no fixing this. There was no coming back. All that was left now was figuring out how to walk away from the ruins without losing whatever small pieces of myself I still had left. I don't even know how I ended up there. One minute I was sitting on the edge of the bed, lost in a maze of half-formed thoughts and memories I didn't want anymore, and the next thing I knew, I was back in my car, the city sliding past me in a blur of neon lights and empty sidewalks. It was like my body decided that sitting still would K*LL me faster than the truth ever could. I drove until the streets started to look unfamiliar, until the polished storefronts gave way to older, worn-down buildings with boarded-up windows and cracked sidewalks. The kind of place where people who didn't want to be seen could disappear. That's how I found the diner. It was barely more than a hole in the wall, flickering neon sign buzzing in the cold night air, one side of the building sagging like it was too tired to keep pretending. I pulled into the lot without thinking and led the engine. For a long minute, I just sat there, staring at the cracked windshield and wondering what the hell I was doing with my life. Eventually, I forced myself inside. The door jingled weakly as it swung open, and a blast of stale, greasy air hit me in the face. Inside, a handful of people nursed bottomless coffee cups and dead-end conversations. Nobody looked up when I walked in. It was the kind of place where looking at someone else's pain was considered bad manners. I slid into a booth in the back, ordered black coffee from a waitress who didn't ask any questions, and sat there, letting the world go on without me. I wasn't expecting to hear anything. I wasn't looking for answers anymore. I just wanted to sit in the middle of nowhere and pretend I didn't exist for a little while. But sometimes life isn't done kicking you when you're already down. At the booth behind me, two guys in their early 20s were talking loud enough that it was impossible not to overhear them. They wore cheap suits and had the wide-eyed look of people who thought they were a lot more important than they actually were. The kind of guys who treated every Friday happy hour like the boardroom of some Fortune 500 company. At first, I wasn't really paying attention. Just background noise. But then I heard a name that made my blood run cold. Liv. At first, I thought I imagined it. Wishful thinking. Or maybe not so wishful. But then I heard it again. Clear as day. Man, Liv's got Barkley wrapped around her little finger, one of them said, laughing. The other one whistled low. No kidding. She's been working that angle for months. You didn't hear it from me, but she's already planning her exit. Told Miles she's just waiting for the right time to cut ties with her dead-weight husband. I froze. Dead weight. The words hit harder than anything I had heard so far. Harder than seeing her with Miles. Harder than the 6 smiles and the fake laughs. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't some moment of weakness that spiraled out of control. This was a plan. Calculated. Cold. Long before I ever saw her with him, long before the mansion party, she had already decided to leave me. She just hadn't gotten around to telling me yet. The two guys kept talking, laughing like it was the funniest thing they'd heard all week, but I didn't hear the rest. My ears were ringing, and my vision blurred at the edges. I stared down at my coffee, at the way the oily surface rippled slightly under the buzzing overhead lights, and realized I wasn't angry. Not really. I was numb. There was something uniquely cruel about knowing that the person you loved most had been writing you out of their life while still smiling at you across the dinner table. Still kissing you goodnight. Still pretending you had a future together. I had been clinging to the idea that maybe it was some mistake, some impulsive stupidity that could be forgiven if I just tried hard enough to understand. But now I knew. She didn't just betray me. She abandoned me in slow motion, piece by piece, while I stood there holding the pieces of a life she no longer wanted. I sat there until the waitress came by with the check, her face soft with something that might have been pity if she knew even half the story. I slid some crumpled bills onto the table and stumbled out into the night. The cold hit me like a slap, but it wasn't enough to clear the fog in my head. I walked to my car, fumbling with the keys, and sat there for a long time without starting the engine. I leaned my head back against the seat and stared up at the stars, indifferent, distant, beautiful in a way that felt like a cruel joke now. It was over. Not just the marriage. Not just the idea of Liv and me. The version of myself that believed in US was dead, too. I didn't drive home right away. I couldn't. Home didn't mean anything anymore. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the sleeping city, letting the empty streets lead me wherever they wanted. I thought about the way Liv used to reach for my hand in the car when we were driving somewhere together, fingers lacing through mine like it was the most natural thing in the world. I thought about how she used to leave stupid little notes in my lunch, "Love you, dummy," scrawled in her messy handwriting on a post-it. I thought about all the things that used to feel permanent, solid, untouchable, and how easily they all crumbled the moment I stopped looking. By the time the sun started bleeding over the horizon again, painting the world in cold, gray light, I had made a decision. I wasn't going to fight for her. I wasn't going to beg or plead or chase after something that was already gone. If Liv wanted out, if she had already decided months ago that I was dead weight to be discarded, then fine. I'd make it easy for her. She didn't deserve the parts of me that still believed in forever. She didn't deserve anything at all. When Liv came home the next morning, I was already packed. She walked through the door, still in the same dress from the night before, mascara smudged under her eyes like she had cried but not enough. She started talking immediately, something about opportunities, about sacrifices, about how we had to be realistic about the future. Her words buzzed around the room like flies, all noise and no meaning. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I just stood there, watching her try to paint her betrayal as ambition, as if her leaving had been some noble decision. Somewhere deep down, I realized I wasn't even angry anymore. There was nothing left between us but ashes. She had made her choice long ago. I was just late accepting it. I set my wedding ring down on the kitchen counter, a cold, final gesture, and walked out the door with nothing but a duffel bag and Barkley at my side. No shouting. No tears. Just silence. I found a small apartment across town, nothing fancy, but it was mine. Liv tried reaching out a few times, emails, texts, even a letter once, but I never answered. I didn't need to. She had said everything she needed to say by letting me go without a second thought. Sometimes at night, when Barkley snores at my feet and the city hums outside my window, I wonder if she ever loved me the way I loved her. Maybe she did, once. Maybe not. I'll never really know. But what I do know is that I survived it. And somehow, that's enough.